Good afternoon, my friends from the Meat Lover channel. Today I'm going to tell you how I ended up making out with my son's friend. It was just another ordinary weekend day. The smell of food on the stove was already beginning to fill the kitchen as I prepared lunch for my 24-year-old son, Mike. He had called me early with that casual tone of someone who doesn't care about life's problems, asking me to make his favorite food, lasagna. But it was what he said afterwards that intrigued me. "Mom, put out an extra plate. I'm bringing John to have lunch with us." That caught me off guard. It had been years since anyone other than Mike had sat at that table with me. Since my husband had left, the house had become silent and empty, but not in that peaceful way. It was a heavy silence that reminded me every day of his absence, of the lack of warmth and company. It's been 10 years since my husband died of a massive heart attack. 10 years since that strong and present man left, taking with him more than just his physical presence. He took my joy, my desire to live, and more than that, he took my desire to open up to another man. Not that I didn't feel desires. They were still there, pulsating in some corner of my mind and body. It was impossible not to feel them, especially on long nights when the touch of loneliness grew stronger and the imagination took over. But they were just thoughts, fantasies that I never had the courage to turn into reality. After he left, I withdrew. I stayed in my corner, living more in my head than in the world outside. Now, the idea of having someone else at the table, especially a young friend of my son's, made me strangely nervous. I wondered what it would be like to look at someone who wasn't part of the silence that had enveloped me for so long. You may think that I don't get anyone because I'm ugly or because of my age, but you're wrong. Everywhere I go, I get glances from head to toe, as if they were unveiling every curve of my body. Discreet catcalls, and some not so discreet, are almost routine, especially here in the neighborhood. Everyone knows I'm a widow, and it seems that this awakens something in the men around me, as if they see a woman who still has a lot to offer, even if I hide behind this facade of calm. When the food was almost ready, I heard the sound of the door opening, followed by the laughter that echoed down the corridor. My heart leapt slightly. I don't know if it was nerves or something else, but the thought of welcoming someone new made me uneasy. I stood in the kitchen, trying to hide my anxiety as I stirred the pot, adjusting the seasoning, even though everything was already ready. I quickly ran my hands through my hair, trying to straighten up. I had no idea how I looked, but I wanted to make a good impression, even if I wouldn't admit it even to myself. Mike was the first to show up, with his easy smile and sweaty face, bringing all the energy of the soccer they had just played. He complimented the smell of the food while I hugged him, smelling that typical smell of the field and effort. "You're all dirty, Mike. Go take a shower before you sit down at the table." I said it with that motherly tone he already knew well. He grumbled a little, but went on without asking too many questions. It was then that I found myself alone with John. He was standing in the corner of the kitchen, a bit shy, as if he didn't know where to put his hands or his gaze. When our eyes finally met, he smiled shyly and said, "Hi, Mrs. Megan, how are you?" His voice was deep but soft, with a polite tone that contrasted with his young athletic appearance. It made me smile involuntarily. "Fine, John. Welcome," I replied, while trying to ignore the slight heat that rose to my face. I was completely surprised when I finally paid attention to John's appearance. He looked absurdly like my husband when he was young, the same striking features, the penetrating gaze, and the smile that was a little shy but full of charm. It shook me in a way I hadn't expected, awakening something in me that had been dormant for years. It was as if a forgotten flame had been lit right there in my kitchen. To disguise the whirlwind of emotions, I did my best to appear calm. "Put your shame aside, John, and sit down at the table. We'll wait for Mike together." He nodded in agreement, still a little hesitant, but pulled out a chair to sit down. As soon as we sat down, something almost magical happened. The conversation flowed so naturally that it didn't seem like the first time we'd met. He began by praising the smell of the food, saying that it was almost impossible to resist. "My mouth is already salivating, Mrs. Megan. You have a gift, huh?" I smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and something else I couldn't name. "Thanks, John. If you want, you can have a bite to eat while we wait for Mike." "No problem." But he shook his head and interrupted me, with a smile that seemed to carry a world of intentions. "I'd rather wait. I think the food will be even better when we're all at the table." There was something in the way he said things, in the way he looked at me, that made my heart beat a little faster. I was lost in my own thoughts, as if something inside me had suddenly awakened, As he spoke, my body, so accustomed to silence and solitude, began to react in a way that left me confused and, at the same time, craven. My melons began to harden, becoming visibly stiff and hard under my t-shirt. It was as if my own body was reminding me of who I still was, of the desire that had been in me for so long. At that moment, I wasn't fully aware of what was happening, but John seemed to notice before I did. His eyes, which had previously been on my face, drifted slowly down to my melons. He stood there, staring long enough for me to realize what had caught his attention. It was only then that I realized. My shirt was clearly marked, revealing what I had been trying to ignore. My desire was screaming out, and he had noticed. Heat surged through my body, a mixture of shame and excitement. I didn't know whether to look away or say something, but the truth was that I couldn't move. John, however, kept quiet, as if that moment was some kind of secret between us. When I realized how I was reacting in front of him, I tried to get up from the chair, but it was as if my body wasn't under my control. A shiver went through me, followed by a warmth that began to run down my skin in drops of sweat. John, attentive to my every move, stood up quickly and approached me, placing his hand on my arm with a firm, gentle touch. "Are you all right, Megan? Do you need a glass of water?" The concern in his voice was evident, but there was something else in the way he looked at me, something that made the heat rise even more. I swallowed, trying to pull myself together. "Thanks, John. I think it's just the heat. It's unbearable today," I lied, although part of it was true. To reinforce the excuse, I unbuttoned a few buttons on my shirt, leaving the neckline a little looser. The air coming in brought me momentary relief, but the truth was that my body was on fire for a completely different reason. He kept his eyes on me as he handed me the glass of water, standing so close that I could feel his light, warm breath. I drank the water quickly in an attempt to dispel the whirlwind of sensations. But John was still there, just a few centimeters away, watching me with an intensity that made me even more vulnerable. As I sipped my glass of water, trying to disguise my nervousness, something inevitably caught my eye. Right there, below John, a bulge began to stand out. My gaze, as if of its own volition, went down and remained fixed on that spot. I was mesmerized, completely out of my mind, until he noticed. "Is that why you're like this, Megan?" His deep voice made me freeze. "Do you feel like doing things to me?" My heart raced like never before. I was in shock, not knowing what to say, the glass still in my hand shaken slightly. I would never have imagined that he would be so direct, so audacious. Before I could react, he took a step forward, coming even closer. "I know you want to," he continued, his eyes fixed on mine, while his voice seemed to invade me. "Look at the way you look. Your melons are even hard. Your desire is clear." My breathing became heavier, and I could feel my face burning with shame and desire. How could he be saying that so naturally? "And also," he continued, leaning in a little, "I know you're single. You must feel lonely, don't you?" Those words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It was as if he had read everything I had been feeling for the last few years, all the lonely nights, all the repressed desires. I remained silent, hoping that he would notice my discomfort, but that wasn't enough. John approached me, his gaze fixed and sincere, and said softly, "You're really very beautiful, Megan. It would be a waste if no one took advantage of it." I felt my heart racing, but I tried to keep my composure. I stood up abruptly and replied, "We need to change the subject. Mike will be back from his shower soon." John smiled mischievously, that expression that always made me a little nervous. "I'm going to come over in the evening. If you want to do anything, just open the door," he said with a twinkle in his eye that I couldn't ignore. I confess I was confused, not quite understanding what was going on, but there was something in that smile that aroused an intense desire within me, a sensation I had never expected to feel. I was no fool and quickly thought, "What are you doing with your life, Megan?" "Nothing. I'm getting old, and in a few years I won't be able to enjoy life. Nothing." Then, as if an invisible force was pushing me, I took a step towards John. Our eyes met, and without thinking twice, I kissed him. It was an intense kiss, full of desire and feelings repressed for so long. I felt his warmth spread through my body. Every touch was like a flame that set my senses on fire. Words disappeared, leaving only the deep connection between the two of us. It was as if all time stood still, and at that moment, all that mattered was us. John responded to my kiss with the same intensity, his hands wrapping around my body securely and with desire. After a few seconds of kissing madly, I felt a mixture of desire and awareness invade my being. With a quick movement, I pushed John back and said, trying to control the situation, We need to behave. Mike will be here soon." This time, he really was on his way. John quickly sat down at the table while I pretended to be busy washing the dishes, my heart still racing from the brief moment of intimacy. Shortly afterwards, my son entered the kitchen, all excited and happy, completely oblivious to what had happened between John and me. I was immediately relieved to see him smile and quickly got the plates to serve lunch. We sat together at the table talking about his day at college and sharing stories, trying to normalize the atmosphere after that tense moment. During the meal, I noticed John's gaze on me, a mixture of restrained desire and complicity that made my cheeks blush. Although I tried to keep my composure, the attraction between us was unquestionable. After everyone had eaten, John stood up, announcing that he had to leave for his house. He said goodbye to my son with a warm smile and gave me a firm hug, whispering softly in my ear, "I'll be here tonight, open the door." I widened my eyes in surprise at the audacity of his proposal, but managed to remain outwardly calm. After we said goodbye, my son went to his room to study for college, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I tidied up the house, my mind couldn't get John out of my head. My every move seemed to reflect the memory of that hug and the words he had whispered. I felt a mixture of excitement and guilt, knowing that what we were doing was risky, but at the same time unable to resist the attraction I felt for him. The hours went by, and my heart beat faster and faster, anxiously awaiting John's arrival. I imagined the exact time when he would approach my door, ready to engage me and turn our chemistry into something deeper. The anticipation grew with every passing minute, and I found myself daydreaming about what might happen. Finally, close to midnight, I distinctly heard 3 soft knocks on the door. My heart raced, and I stood there watching the door with wide eyes and a tense body, desperately wanting to open it and enjoy every second with him. The temptation was almost unbearable, but the doubt and fear of being discovered paralyzed me. The knocks went on for several more minutes as if the universe was testing my courage, but I couldn't muster the strength to receive John. After that day, he never came home again. Sometimes I would ask Mike what had happened to John, expressing the wish that he would bring his friend over for dinner again. However, my son revealed to me that whenever Mike tried to invite John, he would find some excuse not to come. This revelation left me confused and a little disappointed. The following nights were marked by a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to distract myself with daily tasks, but my mind always returned to John and that brief but intense moment of intimacy. There was a sense of loss, as if something had been torn away from me, but at the same time, a flame was still burning, waiting to be rekindled. I never saw John again. After that event, I felt a renewal inside me, as if a new energy had taken over my being. I was more alive and felt more comfortable trying something again with someone. That brief moment with John had awakened in me a courage I didn't even know I possessed. Now my thoughts turned to someone else, my friend's son, who is also my neighbor. There is something about him that attracts me, a connection that goes beyond friendship. But I'll leave that story for another time. Maybe one day I'll have the courage to explore these feelings too. And you, from which city are you watching us? Did you like this true story of infidelity? Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Your participation is very important.